Imagine this. A whole continent is just engulfed in the flames of World War II. But right in the middle of it all, there's this one nation, Switzerland, that's an island of peace. But here's the thing, that peace was anything but simple. This is a story about survival, really tough compromises, and the incredible pressure of trying to stay neutral when the world around you is at war.
And that brings us to the big question we're going to tackle here. What is the true cost of staying out of a war? It's a question the Swiss people had to ask themselves every single day. And trust me, the answer is way more complicated than you might think. It really makes you wonder what any of us would do when faced with choices that seem, well, impossible.
So let's set the scene. From 1939 on, Switzerland was completely, totally surrounded by Axis powers. For the Swiss people, an invasion wasn't some distant what if. No, it felt like it could happen any day. The entire country was on high alert, just bracing for the absolute unthinkable.
Now, Switzerland's official policy was something called armed neutrality. And this wasn't a passive, hey, please don't hurt us kind of thing, not at all. It was an active, almost defiant strategy. The message they sent to the world was pretty clear. We're not picking a side, but if you even think about crossing our borders, we will fight you. This was neutrality with some serious teeth.
And you know what? This wasn't just talk. The entire country basically turned itself into a fortress. The whole army was mobilized, ready to go at a moment's notice. They heavily fortified their famous mountain passes, creating this incredible natural stronghold. And for regular people, life became a series of drills, always preparing for an attack that felt like it was just around the corner. So beyond all the military stuff, this constant threat had a huge effect on the daily lives of Swiss people. What did it actually feel like to live inside this fortress, completely surrounded by war?
This chart right here really nails the paradox of their situation. From the outside, the world looked at Switzerland and saw this peaceful little country, completely untouched by the fighting. But the reality for the people living there, it was a constant, grinding psychological stress, knowing that unbelievable danger was literally just across the border. I mean, daily life just flipped upside down, almost overnight. The normal, prosperous life people were used to, gone. All of a sudden, you needed ration cards for food, for fuel, for everything. Cities were plunged into darkness during routine blackout drills to avoid being targets. Every family had to pinch every penny and save every resource, all while living with this deep, gnawing uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring.
And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the Swiss dilemma. Because staying alive wasn't just about military defense or keeping the economy going. It was a massive moral challenge. The country was basically forced to walk this incredibly thin tightrope between its own survival and its basic human responsibilities. This table here really lays out the compromises they had to make, and they were huge. For the sake of survival, Switzerland made two incredibly controversial choices. First, they put strict limits on refugees. The rationale was a fear of spies and the strain on their limited resources. But the consequence was that thousands of people fleeing for their lives were turned away at the border. Just heartbreaking. Second, they continued to trade with the Axis powers. They saw it as essential to keep their economy afloat and maintain a fragile peace. But after the war, this led to intense international criticism. These were just impossible choices with consequences that would last for decades. So when the war finally did end, Switzerland was physically in one piece, but its reputation, not so much. The world that rose from the ashes of the war started to look back, and they began to ask some really tough questions about the choices Switzerland had made inside its neutral fortress. And this was the great paradox after the war. On one hand, hey, the country was physically fine, its economy was stable, and its government was strong. But on the other hand, it was facing a storm of criticism from the international community, especially about its refugee policies and its trade with the Axis. They had survived, yes, but now they had to answer for how they survived. In the years after the war, Switzerland's big challenge wasn't rebuilding cities, it was rebuilding a reputation. And that kicked off this whole period of deep national reflection, a deliberate kind of renewal, and a complete reimagining of its role on the world stage. So they set out on a new path. First, they had to face all that international criticism head on.
Then, they made a very conscious choice to double down on their humanitarian role, becoming a huge player in organizations like the Red Cross. They started supporting global cooperation, and over time, they used that famous neutrality to become one of the world's most important centers for diplomacy and peace talks.
When you really step back and look at it, those difficult, painful, and yes, controversial choices made during World War II, they directly shaped the identity of the Switzerland we know today. The nation that came out of that fire became one that was deeply committed to using its unique position to push for peace and global responsibility.
And that brings us right back to where we started. When you look at all of it, the fear, the compromises, the survival, and everything that came after, was Switzerland's neutrality a moral failure, or was it a strategy that, while messy, was absolutely necessary for survival? That's a question that history is still wrestling with, and maybe one for all of us to think about too.